The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest room ever built in space. Its crystal dome stretched so wide that clouds sometimes formed near the ceiling. Thousands of seats rose in circles around the central stage, and in those seats sat the representatives of over 400 species from every corner of the galaxy. Today, every seat was full. Ambassador Elena Voss sat in the human section near the back of the chamber. She was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes. She wore a simple dark suit, while the aliens around her wore robes of light, armor made from living metal, and cloaks that shifted color with their moods. She looked plain among them, ordinary. That was the point. Beside her sat her aide, Commander David Chen, a tall man with a soldier's posture and a diplomat's patience. He leaned close to her and whispered, "The Count isn't going to go our way." Voss nodded slightly. "I know." On the central stage, Delegate Siethra of the Valesi was finishing her speech. She was tall and elegant, with silver skin that shimmered under the chamber lights. Her voice rang out clear and sharp, and every word was chosen like a weapon. "The humans have been members of this council for 40 years, Siethra said, her 4 eyes sweeping across the chamber. In that time, they have expanded faster than any species in recorded history. They have settled worlds at a rate that concerns every long-standing member. They have uplifted 3 primitive species without council approval, violating our most sacred laws of non-interference. And they have inserted themselves into every system, every trade route, every committee, every corner of our civilization." She paused and let the silence build. "This is not partnership. This is infiltration. And if we do not act now, while we still can, we will wake up one morning and find that the galaxy belongs to them." The chamber erupted in applause. Not all of it, but enough. More than enough. High Arbiter Torvan, the leader of the council, rose from his elevated seat. He was a Rhytheki, nearly 3 meters tall, with thick gray skin like stone and deep-set eyes that glowed faintly orange. He had led the council for 60 years. His word was law in all but name. "The resolution before us is clear," Torvan said in his deep, rumbling voice. "The marginalization decree will remove humanity's voting rights, reduce their status to observer only, revoke their access to primary trade routes, and exclude them from all military intelligence sharing. Ambassador Voss, you may speak before the vote." Every eye in the chamber turned to the human section. 400 species watched the small woman in the dark suit stand up from her seat. Siethra watched with a small smile, expecting anger. Torvan watched with cold eyes, expecting pleading. The galaxy expected a fight. Elena Voss walked slowly to the stage. Her footsteps were the only sound in the chamber. She stepped up to the speaking platform, looked out at the vast sea of alien faces, and smiled. "Thank you, High Arbiter," she said. Her voice was soft but steady. "And thank you to every member of this council. For 40 years, humanity has had the privilege of sitting among you. We have learned so much from each of you. The Rhytheki taught us patience. The Drenathi taught us curiosity. The Valesi taught us the power of culture and art." She looked directly at Siethra when she said this. The Valesi delegate's smile faltered just slightly. "We understand this vote," Voss continued. "We understand the concerns. We are a young species, and we have moved quickly, perhaps too quickly for some. We do not blame you for your caution. We do not blame you for your fear." The word fear landed like a stone in water. Ripples of discomfort spread across the chamber. If this is the will of the council, then humanity accepts it with grace. We will not argue. We will not threaten. We will not beg. She paused and took a slow breath. We will simply say, "Thank you. Thank you for 40 good years. We wish you all the very best." She bowed once, turned, and walked back to her seat. The chamber was silent for a long, uncomfortable moment. This was not what anyone had expected. There was no drama, no anger, no desperate appeal, just quiet acceptance and a polite goodbye. Torvald cleared his throat. Very well, we shall vote. The vote took less than 3 minutes. 412 species voted in favor of the decree. Humanity did not vote. When the results appeared on the massive display above the stage, there was cheering from some sections, polite applause from others, and silence from a few. In the far corner of the chamber, observer Colane of the Drenathi sat very still. He was a thin creature with large dark eyes and long fingers that he kept folded in his lap. He was a scholar who had spent his career studying other species, and he had spent the last 10 years studying humans. He did not cheer. He did not applaud. He watched Elena Voss gather her documents calmly, shake hands with Commander Chen, and walk toward the exit. She did not look back. Colane had read every human history book he could find. He had studied their wars, their revolutions, their art, their science. He knew something about humans that most of the council did not understand. Humans did not collapse when you pushed them down. They did not scatter when you cast them out. They went quiet, and they built. That was what scared him. By midnight, the human delegation had packed up their entire section of the station. Every office, every storage room, every file and photograph and coffee machine. They cleaned the floors. They left the furniture neatly arranged. They even fixed a broken light panel in the hallway that maintenance had ignored for 2 years. By morning, the human wing was empty, spotless and silent, as if no one had ever been there at all. Colane walked through the empty hallways alone. His footsteps echoed off bare walls. He stopped at the door of what had been Ambassador Voss's office. On the desk, she had left a single item, a small card made of paper, something most species had stopped using thousands of years ago. On it, in neat handwriting, were 5 words. Then we wish you well. Colane held the card in his thin fingers and felt something cold settle in his chest. It was not sadness. It was not anger. It was the feeling of standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing too late that the ground beneath your feet had already begun to crack. He looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, the humans were going home, and the galaxy, in all its ancient wisdom, had just made the worst mistake in its history. It just didn't know it yet. The first week after the humans left was a celebration. Delegate Cithra hosted a grand reception on the Valesi diplomatic yacht, a ship so beautiful that it looked like it was carved from moonlight. Representatives from dozens of species attended. They drank rare wines from the crystal fields of Moth 4. They gave speeches about the dawn of a new era, an era where the council would no longer be disrupted by the ambitions of a young and reckless species. High Arbiter Torvald did not attend the party. He was not a creature of celebration, but he allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction in his private quarters. The human problem had been solved cleanly. No war, no conflict, just a vote, a polite goodbye, and an empty hallway. It was, he thought, the perfect example of civilized governance. By the second week, the celebration was over, and the problems began. It started with the FTL relay network. The relay network was the backbone of galactic civilization. It allowed ships to travel faster than light by jumping between relay stations spread across thousands of light years. Without it, a journey that took hours would take centuries. Every species depended on it the way a body depends on blood. 3 relay stations in the outer sectors went offline on the same day. Technicians from 4 different species rushed to repair them and found something unexpected. The stations had been modified, improved. Someone had rewritten their core software and upgraded their hardware with components that no one recognized. The modifications made the stations 30% more efficient, but they also made them impossible to repair without understanding the new systems. The technicians traced the modifications back to their source: humans. Over the past 20 years, human engineers had been volunteering for relay maintenance duty. It was boring, unglamorous work. But quietly, without telling anyone, the humans had rebuilt nearly a third of the entire network. Now that they were gone, no one knew how to fix what they had improved. Colane was the first to understand the scale of the problem. He was a researcher by nature, a creature who collected facts the way others collected treasure. He began making calls, sending messages, digging through records. What he found made his blood run cold. The relay network was only the beginning. Human medical ships had been running supply routes to 3 frontier sectors. These were poor regions, far from the wealthy core worlds, home to small species that the Council mostly ignored. The humans had been delivering medicine, food, and equipment to these sectors for over 15 years. They did it at a loss. They never asked for payment. They never even reported it to the Council. They just did it because people were sick and they had medicine. Now the shipments had stopped. Within a month, hospitals in the frontier sectors began running out of critical supplies. Then there was the translation software. Every species in the galaxy used the Universal Translation System to communicate with each other. It was considered one of the great achievements of galactic civilization. What most people did not know was that the core of the system, the deep algorithms that allowed it to bridge the gap between fundamentally different forms of language, had been written by a team of human linguists 30 years ago. They had donated the code freely and never asked for credit. The system worked so well that everyone forgot who built it. Now it was starting to break. Small errors at first. A trade negotiation between the Korathi and the Mivari nearly collapsed because the system translated "we accept your offer" as "we reject your terms." It was a tiny error, but in diplomacy, tiny errors could start wars. Colane compiled all of this into a classified report. He titled it "Structural Dependencies on Terran Infrastructure" and presented it to the Council's inner circle. The report was 40 pages long. It detailed over 200 systems, programs, and services that humanity had been quietly providing to the galaxy. Things no one had noticed, things no one had thanked them for, things that were now falling apart. Torvon read the first 10 pages and pushed it aside. "We are the Galactic Council," he said. "We governed the stars for 10,000 years before the humans learned to make fire. We will manage." Scythra was more dismissive. "This is fear-mongering," she said. "The Dranathi have always been too cautious. We will simply rebuild what the humans built. It cannot be that difficult." Colane said nothing. He knew that arguing with powerful people who had already made up their minds was like shouting at a mountain. So he bowed politely and left the chamber. But he kept his report, and he kept watching. The pirates came next. The outer rim of the galaxy had always been lawless. It was too far from the core worlds for the Council's fleets to patrol effectively. For decades, human warships had been running anti-piracy operations in these regions. They did it voluntarily. They did it without asking for permission or recognition. They simply sent their ships into the dark spaces between the stars and hunted down anyone who preyed on the weak. Without the human patrols, the Kethvari raiders grew bold almost overnight. They attacked a Grecian train convoy and destroyed 3 ships. They raided a Thule colony and took 200 hostages. They hijacked a Myvari medical transport and sold the supplies on the black market. The Council received desperate messages from a dozen minor species. "Please help. Please send ships. Please do something." The Council debated for 3 weeks. By the time they agreed on a response, the Kethvari had attacked 4 more convoys, and the Thule had lost another colony. Meanwhile, humanity was silent. This was perhaps the most unsettling part of all. The humans had not sent a single message since the day they left. No complaints, no demands, no threats, no offers to help, nothing. Their borders were closed. Their communication channels were dark. Long-range sensor scans showed that their systems were active. Their ships were moving. Their worlds were lit up with energy. They were clearly alive and busy. But they were not talking to anyone. Colane spent long nights staring at the data from the human border regions. He noticed something strange. The energy output from human space was increasing. Not slowly, not gradually. It was growing at an exponential rate. Whatever the humans were doing in their isolation, they were doing it fast. He thought about Elena Voss and her quiet smile. He thought about the card she had left on her desk. He thought about all the things the humans had done for the galaxy without ever being asked, and all the things the galaxy had done to the humans without ever saying sorry. And he wondered what the humans were building in the silence. On the 3-month anniversary of the withdrawal, Colane received a message from a colleague on the frontier. It was short and desperate. It said, "The hospital ran out of medicine today. 43 children are sick. We sent a request to the council 6 weeks ago. No one has responded. We are trying to reach the humans, but we do not know how. Please help us." Colane sat in his office and read the message 3 times. Then he put his head in his hands and sat in the dark for a very long time. Outside his window, the stars burned on, cold and indifferent. And somewhere among them, 412 species were beginning to learn, slowly and painfully, exactly what they had thrown away. 6 months after the humans left, the galaxy began to break. It did not break all at once. It broke the way ice breaks on a frozen lake. One crack here, another there, and then suddenly the whole surface was splitting apart, and there was nothing underneath but dark, cold water. The first crack was the war. The Valesi and the Rifeki had hated each other for over 1,000 years. They had fought 3 wars in the past, terrible wars that burned entire star systems to ash. For the last 40 years, they had been at peace. Most people believed this was because both sides had grown wise. Both sides had matured. Both sides had learned from the past. Colane knew the truth. The peace had held because of humans. For 4 decades, human diplomats had served as the neutral ground between the 2 great powers. When the Valesi accused the Rifeki of expanding into disputed territory, it was a human mediator who calmed the room. When the Rifeki suspected the Valesi of spying on their military installations, it was a human back-channel that resolved the crisis quietly. Humans had no old grudges with either side. They had no territorial interests in the disputed zones. They were trusted by both sides precisely because they had nothing to gain. Now the mediators were gone, and within 3 months of their departure, Valesi warships and Rifeki cruisers were firing on each other over a worthless moon in the Keth Nebula. It was a small battle. Only 12 ships were destroyed, but it was the first blood, and everyone knew that first blood was never the last. The council tried to intervene. Torvan himself called for a ceasefire. But Torvan was Rifeki, and the Valesi did not trust him to be neutral. Sithra was Valesi, and the Rifeki did not trust her. The humans had been the middle, and the middle was gone. The second crack was the economy. Humanity had been the galaxy's largest single market. They bought everything: alien art, alien food, alien technology, alien music. Human consumers were famously curious. They wanted to try everything, taste everything, experience everything. This hunger had pumped enormous amounts of wealth into the galactic economy. Entire species had built their economies around selling goods to human markets. When humanity closed its borders, that money vanished overnight. The Korathi, a species of master craftsmen, lost 60% of their export revenue in a single quarter. The Balvani, who grew exotic fruits on their tropical homeworld, lost their biggest customer and could not find another. Unemployment spread. Anger came after that. The third crack was trust. 3 minor species, the Thule, the Grecian, and the Mavari, announced their withdrawal from the Council on the same day. Their joint statement was short and bitter. The Council had promised to protect all its members equally, they said. But when the pirates came, the Council had debated for weeks while their people died. Meanwhile, the humans who owed them nothing had protected them for decades without ever being asked. The 3 species did not just leave the Council. They sent a message to Earth. No one knew exactly what the message said. But 2 weeks later, human cargo ships appeared at the borders of Thule, Grecian, and Mavari space. They carried medicine, food, building materials, and engineers. The 3 species had signed bilateral treaties with humanity, quietly, without telling anyone. The Council was furious. Torvon called it a betrayal. Scythra called it proof that humans were predators, waiting for weak species to break away from the herd. Colaine called it exactly what any reasonable person would do when the people who were supposed to help you failed and the people who were cast out came back to save you. But the worst moment, the moment that truly shattered the Council's confidence, came 7 months after the withdrawal. A plague broke out on the Valesi homeworld. It was a mutated pathogen, something that had evolved in one of the joint species colonies and hitchhiked back on a transport ship. It spread fast. Within weeks, millions of Valesi were sick. Their hospitals were overwhelmed. Their doctors worked around the clock, but the pathogen was unlike anything they had seen before. It attacked the nervous system, and there was no known cure. Except there was. The cure required a specific protein folding technique that had been developed by human biotech researchers 15 years earlier. It was cutting-edge science, the kind of work that the Valesi had once dismissed as crude and unsophisticated. Now it was the only thing that could save them. Scythra, the delegate who had stood on the Council stage and called humans a threat to galactic civilization, had to sit down and write a message to the species she had helped cast out. She had to ask them for help. The message took her 3 hours to write. Her aide said later that she rewrote it 11 times. The message was sent to Earth, and then silence. 1 day passed, 2 days, 3 days. The death toll on the Valesi homeworld climbed into the hundreds of thousands. She sat in her office and stared at her communication screen and waited. On the 4th day, a response came from Earth. It was not a negotiation. It was not a demand for apology or payment or political concessions. It was a data package. Inside was the complete protein folding sequence, the manufacturing instructions, the dosage guidelines, and a set of notes from the research team explaining how to adapt it for Valesi biology. Attached to the data was a single message. It read, "We bear no grudge. We hope for your recovery." That was all. No conditions, no strings, no gloating, just the cure and a kind word. When the message was read aloud in the Council chamber, the room went completely silent. For a long time, no one spoke. Some delegates looked at the floor. Others looked at their hands. A few looked at the empty section where the humans used to sit. Colaine watched from his seat and understood something that most of the Council was only beginning to grasp. Revenge they could have handled. Anger they could have understood. Demands would have given them something to negotiate with, something to push back against. But this unconditional kindness from a species they had humiliated and cast aside, this was something they had no defense against. In the weeks that followed, the cure was manufactured and distributed across the Valesi homeworld. The plague was beaten, millions of lives were saved, and in every hospital, in every home, in every corner of Valesi civilization, people knew who had saved them. Not the Council, not their allies, not the species that had cheered when the humans were pushed out. The humans, the same humans they had voted to silence. Scythra returned to her private quarters after the crisis ended. Her aides reported that she sat alone in the dark for an entire day. When she finally emerged, she looked like a different person. The sharpness in her eyes was gone. The confidence in her voice had cracked. She said nothing to anyone and went straight to her office. On her desk was a growing pile of messages from other delegates. Some were angry, some were confused, but more and more of them were asking the same question. The question that Colane had been asking himself for months. 1 year after the humans left, the Galactic Council was dying. It was not a dramatic death. There were no explosions, no invasions, no great battles in the sky. It was a slow, quiet collapse, like a building with its foundation removed, settling lower and lower each day until the walls began to crack and the roof began to sag, and everyone inside knew it was only a matter of time. 12 more species had left the council. The relay network was running at 60% capacity, which meant that journeys that once took hours now took days. 2 regional wars were burning, one between the Velesi and the Rhytheki, and another between 3 smaller species fighting over resources that used to be plentiful. The galactic economy had shrunk by nearly a third. Unemployment was spreading across dozens of worlds, and still, humanity was silent. High Arbiter Torvan sat in his private chamber and stared at the reports on his desk. His stone-gray skin, once smooth and powerful, had developed deep cracks along his jaw and forehead. His orange eyes had dimmed. He had led the council for 60 years, and had always believed that his wisdom was the thing holding the galaxy together. Now he was beginning to understand that the thing holding the galaxy together had been a species of soft, short-lived, impossibly stubborn creatures who had been doing the real work while he sat in his chair and took the credit. He called an emergency session. The Grand Chamber was less than half full. Many species had stopped sending representatives. The seats that were occupied held delegates who looked tired, worried, and angry. The celebration of a year ago felt like a distant dream. The crystal dome above them was the same, but everything beneath it had changed. Torvan stood at the central stage and said the words that would have been unthinkable 12 months ago. We must discuss the possibility of requesting humanity's return to the council. The chamber erupted. Some delegates shouted in agreement. Others shouted in outrage. A Korathi delegate slammed his fist on his desk and yelled that the council had brought this on itself. A Rhytheki military commander argued that inviting the humans back would be an admission of weakness that their enemies would exploit. Through all of this, Sithra sat in her seat and said nothing. She looked thin. Her silver skin, once luminous and beautiful, had turned dull. Her 4 eyes stared at nothing. She had not given a public speech in months. But when the shouting died down, she stood up. The chamber went quiet. Everyone remembered that it was Sithra who had started all of this. It was her speech, her arguments, her political maneuvering that had led to the vote. Whatever she said now carried the weight of that history. She walked to the stage slowly. She did not look at the crowd. She looked at the floor. I need to tell you something, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silent chamber, every word was clear. The marginalization decree was my design. You all know this, but you do not know why. She paused and took a shaking breath. I told you that humans were a threat. I told you they were expanding too fast, that they were destabilizing our civilization, that they needed to be contained. I presented data. I made arguments. I convinced 412 of you to vote with me. She looked up at the chamber for the first time. It was all a lie. The silence deepened. Delegates leaned forward in their seats. The humans were not a threat to the galaxy, Sithra continued. They were a threat to the Velesi, to us, to me. Her voice cracked slightly. For 10,000 years, the Velesi have been the galaxy's cultural leaders. Our art, our philosophy, our science, our music. We were the species that others looked up to. We were the center of civilization. She closed her 4 eyes. And then the humans came. And in 40 years, they did what took us 10,000. Their art moved people in ways ours never had. Their music spread to every corner of the galaxy. Their scientists made discoveries that our best minds could not match. Their engineers solved problems we had been working on for centuries. They were not just catching up to us, they were surpassing us. And they were doing it with a smile and an open hand. She opened her eyes, and they were wet with tears. I was afraid. I was jealous, and I used my position to destroy them before they could replace us. That is the truth. The marginalization decree was not about protecting the galaxy. It was about protecting Velesi pride. And because of my pride, the galaxy is falling apart. She stepped back from the platform. The chamber was completely still. Then, slowly, a low murmur began to build. Delegates turned to each other with shock and anger. The Karathi delegate stood up and pointed at Scythra. The Thule representative, watching remotely from her new home outside the council, disconnected her feed without a word. The confession leaked within hours. By the next day, every species in the galaxy knew the truth. The vote that had cast out humanity had not been an act of collective wisdom. It had been a manipulation, driven by one species' fear of being outshone. In the chaos that followed, Kolain stepped forward with a proposal. He would lead a diplomatic mission to Earth. He would go personally, not as a representative of the Council, but as a representative of the species who wanted to make things right. The Council, having no better options, agreed. Kolain traveled to the Sol system alone, in a small Dranathi research vessel. When he crossed into human space, he expected to be challenged, scanned, perhaps even turned away. Instead, a human escort ship appeared beside him within minutes. A friendly voice came over the communication channel. "Welcome to Sol, Observer Kolain. Ambassador Voss is expecting you. Please follow us to Mars." He followed the escort ship to Mars, and what he saw through his viewport made him forget to breathe. Mars was green. The planet that Kolain had seen in old files as a dead red desert was now covered in vast forests, blue lakes, and white cities that gleamed in the sunlight. Enormous structures orbited the planet, stations and shipyards, and something that looked like a ring of light circling the equator. The energy readings on his instruments were so high that he thought his sensors were broken. He recalibrated them 3 times. They were not broken. In 2 years, the humans had done what should have taken centuries. They had transformed a dead world into a paradise, and built infrastructure that rivaled anything the oldest species in the galaxy had achieved. They had been holding back, Kolain realized. All those years in the Council, all those decades of being treated as the junior species, the newcomers, the children who needed to be managed. They had been holding back the entire time. He landed in a city called New Geneva and was escorted to a simple building surrounded by gardens. Inside, Ambassador Elena Voss was waiting for him. She looked the same as he remembered, calm eyes, warm smile, a cup of something hot in her hands. She was now the Secretary of Exo Relations, but she wore the same kind of simple dark suit she had always worn. She offered him tea. He accepted. They talked for a long time. Kolain told her everything. The failing relay network, the wars, the economic collapse, the plague, Scythra's confession. He held nothing back. He told her the truth because he believed she deserved it. When he finished, Voss sat quietly for a moment, looking out the window at the green hills of Mars. "We knew it would be hard for them," she said softly. We didn't want it to be. We tried to set things up so the transition would be smooth. We documented everything we could before we left. We hoped they would find the manuals, the guides, the records we left behind. Colleen blinked. You left instructions? Of course we did, Voss said. In every system we maintained, every relay station we upgraded, every medical route we ran. We left detailed documentation, everything they needed to continue without us. Colleen felt something twist in his chest. He knew with absolute certainty that no one had looked for those documents. No one had even thought to look. He asked the question he had come to ask. Will you come back? Her eyes were kind, but there was something behind them. Something vast and quiet and immovable. We were never trying to take anyone's place, she said. We just wanted to help. We wanted to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and we were punished for it. She set down her cup. So now we help ourselves, and we help anyone who comes to us directly, as equals, not as junior members, not as children to be managed, as equals. She smiled gently. We will not rejoin the council, Colleen, but any species that comes to us in good faith will find an open door. Colleen nodded slowly. It was not the answer the council wanted, but it was the answer they deserved. He flew home the next day. When he stood before the council and delivered humanity's response, the grand chamber was silent for a very long time. No one shouted. No one argued. They just sat in their seats and felt the weight of what they had lost. 3 years after the humans withdrew from the Galactic Council, the Galactic Council ceased to exist. There was no dramatic final session, no angry last speech, no vote to dissolve. The council simply emptied, slowly and quietly, like water draining from a cracked bowl. Species stopped sending delegates. Committees stopped meeting. The Grand Chamber, which had once held the representatives of over 400 civilizations, sat dark and cold, its crystal dome gathering dust. Torvald signed the dissolution order alone in his office on a gray morning. His hand trembled as he pressed his seal into the document. 60 years of leadership, 10,000 years of tradition, and it ended with a piece of paper and an old man sitting by himself in an empty room. He recorded a private message to Ambassador Voss that evening. It was short. His deep voice, once so commanding, sounded thin and tired. He said he was sorry. He said he had believed that the galaxy needed a firm hand at the top, and that he had been so focused on holding power that he never noticed who was actually doing the work beneath him. Voss responded within the hour. She thanked him for his 60 years of service. She said that leading so many species for so long was a burden that few could carry, and that she respected him for bearing it as long as he did. She wished him a peaceful retirement. His aides said later that it was the first time in 60 years they had seen the High Arbiter weep. In the void left by the Council, something new began to grow. Humanity had spent 3 years building in silence. When they finally opened their doors again, they did not come back as a junior member, asking for a seat at someone else's table. They came back as architects, with a new blueprint. They called it the Terran Cooperative Accords. The Accords were simple in principle, but revolutionary in practice. There was no central authority, no high arbiter, no inner circle of powerful species making decisions for everyone else. Instead, the Accords were a network of individual treaties between species who chose to work together. Every agreement was voluntary. Every partnership was between equals. Any species could join, and any species could leave at any time without punishment. The old council had been a pyramid, with power concentrated at the top. The Accords were a web, with connections spreading in every direction, and no single point of control. The first species to sign were the Thule, the Grecian, and the Navari. They had been working with humanity since the early days of the withdrawal, and their worlds had flourished under the bilateral treaties. Their economies had recovered, their people were safe, their children had medicine. They became known across the galaxy as the first friends, and their success became the most powerful argument for the new system. Other species looked at the Thule and the Grecian and the Mivari, and saw small vulnerable civilizations that had been abandoned by the Council and saved by humanity. They saw proof that the new way worked. Within a year, over 100 species had signed onto the Accords. Within 2 years, the number passed 200. The relay network was rebuilt. Human engineers worked alongside technicians from dozens of species, and this time they trained everyone on every system. There were no secrets, no hidden modifications, no quiet improvements that only one species understood. Everything was documented, shared, and taught. When a Karathi technician asked a human engineer why they were being so open with their technology, the human laughed and said, "Because the whole point is that you shouldn't need us. The goal is that everyone can fix everything." The piracy problem was solved not by a single fleet, but by a cooperative patrol system. Ships from 30 different species worked together to secure the outer rim. The Kethvari raiders, who had grown bold in the chaos, suddenly found themselves facing a united front. They retreated to the deep margins and were rarely heard from again. The economy recovered, not to what it had been, but to something different, something more balanced. Under the old council, wealth had flowed toward the powerful core species and trickled down slowly to the rest. Under the Accords, trade routes were open and fair. Small species had the same access to markets as large ones. The Karathi craftsmen found new customers. The Belvani found new trade partners. The galaxy was still not perfect, but it was more equal than it had ever been. Saithra faced a political tribunal on the Valesi homeworld. The charges were serious. She had manipulated the council. She had deceived hundreds of species. She had caused, directly or indirectly, wars, economic collapse, and the deaths of thousands. The tribunal lasted for weeks. Witnesses came from across the galaxy to testify. Kolain was among them. He told the truth plainly and without anger. He described what he had seen, what he had learned, and what he believed. The verdict was guilty. The sentence was to be decided by popular vote among the Valesi people. Then something unexpected happened. A message arrived from Earth. It was from Ambassador Voss, now widely considered the most influential human alive. She addressed it to the Valesi people directly. She did not defend Saithra's actions. She did not minimize the harm that had been done, but she asked for mercy. "The galaxy does not need more punishment," Voss wrote. "It needs more grace." Delegate Saithra acted out of fear, and fear is something every species understands. She has confessed her wrong. That takes a courage that should not be dismissed. I ask the Valesi people to consider that the measure of a civilization is not how it punishes its failures, but how it makes room for redemption. The message was published across every news channel in the galaxy. Millions read it. And when the Valesi people voted, they voted to pardon Sithra. Not because they forgave her, not because they had forgotten, but because a human woman on Mars, whose species had been wronged more than anyone, had asked them to show mercy. And they could not bring themselves to be less gracious than the people they had once cast out. Sithra lived the rest of her life in quiet retirement. She never held public office again, but she spent her remaining years working in a small cultural exchange program, helping young Valesi artists learn from human creators. She never spoke about the past, she only spoke about the future. Kolain published his account of the crisis. He called it The Quiet Withdrawal, How the Galaxy Lost Its Best Ally and Found a Better Future. It was not a dry academic paper. It was a story, told simply and honestly, about what happens when good people are taken for granted, and what it costs to learn that lesson too late. It became the most widely read text in galactic history. It was translated into every known language. It was taught in schools on hundreds of worlds. In the final chapter, Colane wrote about the first summit held under the Terran Cooperative Accords. It took place on a neutral space station built jointly by humans and 12 other species. Hundreds of delegations attended. The halls were filled with more diversity than the old council had ever seen. There were species who had been council members for millennia standing next to species who had never had a voice before. And moving among all of them, everywhere, were humans. They were not at the head of the table. They were in the hallways, helping translators with difficult phrases. They were in the engineering bays, fixing a broken ventilation system that no one else had noticed. They were in the kitchens, learning to cook alien food and teaching aliens to make coffee. They were in the medical wing, treating a Rhytheki delegate's headache with a gentle smile and a small white pill. Colane stood on a balcony above the main hall and watched it all. He watched the old enemies talking to each other cautiously. He watched the small species walking with their heads held high for the first time. He watched the galaxy, broken and rebuilt, trying to be better than it was before. Then he saw something that stopped him. On the steps outside the summit hall, a young human engineer was kneeling beside a Rhytheki child. The child had a toy, a small mechanical bird that was supposed to fly, but had broken a wing. The engineer had taken out a tiny toolkit and was carefully repairing the toy while talking softly to the child, telling him it would be okay, that they would fix it together. The child's mother stood nearby. She was a tall Rhytheki woman with hard gray skin and suspicious eyes. Her species had voted to cast out the humans. Her leaders had dismissed them as children. And now one of those children was kneeling in the dirt, fixing her son's toy with patient hands and a kind voice. Colane watched the mother's face change. The suspicion faded. Something softer took its place. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. The first small crack in a wall that had stood for too long. The engineer finished the repair and pressed a small button on the bird's back. It sprang from his hands and flew in a wide circle around the child, who laughed and clapped and chased it across the steps. The mother watched her son laugh, and then looked at the human and said something Colane could not hear. The engineer nodded, and smiled, and said something back. Colane never learned what they said to each other. He did not need to. The moment said everything. He returned to his quarters that night and wrote the final lines of his book. They did not conquer us. They did not abandon us. They simply showed us what we had taken for granted, and then when we were ready, they offered it again. That is the terrifying, beautiful thing about humans. You can wound them, exile them, humiliate them, and they will still hold the door open when you come knocking in the dark. Not because they are weak, not because they have forgotten, but because in the end, they would rather build a bridge than burn one. And that, more than their ships or their science or their impossible stubbornness, is why the galaxy will never be the same. They did not change our stars. They changed us. He set down his pen and looked out the window at the galaxy stretched before him, vast and ancient, and full of species who were only now learning what it meant to share it. Somewhere out there, in 100 systems, on 1,000 worlds, humans were building, helping, laughing, and holding doors open. And the galaxy, slowly and imperfectly, and for the first time in its long history, was learning to say thank you.